So we have the pleasure today of presenting Sheena Sharp. Sheena has an illustrious history with HAT, going back to June 10th, 1990, what we call Founders Day, where a group of 25, including Olga, Johan, and Harold Van de Ven, Danny Goldsmith, Doug Yardley, George Goldberg, who's here with us today, and others, including Sheena Sharp, joined to launch our organization. From that day until about the year 2000, Sheena was our spokesperson, and she was everywhere. The Ralph Ben-Mergy Show, if you remember Ralph, on the CBC, Michael Corrin Live, writing letters to the editor, speaking live at every opportunity to educate on humanism and put HAT on the map. Sheena continued to be on the steering committee well into the 2000s before the needs of being a newly fledged entrepreneur took her away from HAT, and she decided at that point to devote her full time to her business and her nascent needs of becoming a green activist. Since that time, Sheena has gone from strength to strength as a green architect, climate change activist, and public policy contributor. So on this anniversary of Charles Darwin's birth 213 years ago, HAT is proud to present climate change activist, green architect, and former leader of our organization, Sheena Sharp.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was really kind and nice. So happy Darwin Day, everybody. I'd like to start with a quote from, this is not working. Sorry. There we go. A quote from Corliss Lamont, The Philosophy of Humanism, which is just to remind everybody, obviously, it's his opinion, but the chief end of human life is to work for human happiness on this earth within the confines of nature. And so then I'd like to talk a little bit about, I don't know if any of you have seen the CBC sort of ads for their extraterrestrial show that is essentially saying, like, how can we have all these stars and planets and nobody is out there? Somebody has to be out there, right? So it's just that we don't know. They're secretly infiltrating us. But there is another hypothesis. And that other hypothesis is that if you look at the history of the planet and you take all of the 4.5 billion years and you put it into 1 year, human beings have been around for about 23 minutes. So what if our 23 minutes was different than somebody else's 23 minutes, was different than someone else? And then it would kind of look like we didn't connect. It would kind of look like the world was empty. What if most human-like civilizations fizzle out? And that would certainly match the data, just saying. So the latest path that human beings have come up with for human self-destruction is climate change. And we have two independent issues each of which could make the planet unlivable. And one is greenhouse gas emissions, and the other is ecological destruction. So Richard already told you essentially about me. I would like to add a few things. I did learn about government when I was volunteering at the Ontario Association of Architects and sort of like how they get things done. And I grew a lot through the Humanist Association. I have to, credit the opportunities that I got with my own personal development. I was also a painter until I started the business, because I took over everything. And our motto is to design for human prosperity and a flourishing web of life. And right now that means low emissions buildings, but we also are activists, as Richard said. We took part in Greta Thunberg's climate strike, which was a lot of fun. A small group of Torontonians showed up and striked with us in front of our office. I also find it interesting some of the insights from Buddhism, which are looking at human society and what individual actions could lead to peace. I think some of those insights are also interesting and very compatible with humanism. Finally, I'm running for office. I am the Green Party candidate for Don Valley West, which is where I live, in this year's election. So that's kind of where I come from when I'm making this presentation. So back to the issue of climate change and planetary destruction. I'm going to focus on buildings, and I'm going to focus on these two issues. So first, ecological destruction. The idea here is essentially that we can't, particularly the forests, we cannot keep destroying the natural ecosystems because they create our habitat, they create the oxygen, they create the pollination, they create our weather, and they create the temperatures. So E.O. Wilson puts forward in his book that he thinks that we should leave half the earth undeveloped. And when he means undeveloped, he means don't even go there. Don't canoe there, don't do anything there. The Green Party, for example, is aiming to preserve 25% of Ontario in this manner. So this is one issue that even if we stopped emissions, if we keep on destroying the planet, if we keep on digging up minerals, we will also render the planet uninhabitable. So then the second thing is greenhouse gas emissions. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time on this chart because it is kind of interesting. So if you look at the top, it says the remaining amount we can emit is 340 to 400 gigatons of CO2 equivalent. And if we do that, we have a 67% chance or better of meeting 1.5 targets. So let's think about this. Would you get on a plane that has a 60% chance, 7% chance of landing? Would you get on a bus that has a 60% chance, 67% chance of getting to where it's going without crashing? Well, it's too late because you're on the planet. So here we go. Let's hope that we can hit that 67%. The other thing that's kind of interesting is that time matters and timing matters. So if we, from now, reduce our emissions, if the planet reduces our emissions in a steady, gradual way from now to 2050, which is only 30 years away, just less than 30 years, we will actually emit 600 gigatons. So if we want to do it in a gradual way, we have to have it done before 2040. A gradual reduction will get us to 400 gigatons. If we do it a little bit faster at the beginning, sooner is always better. I'm sorry to take you back to grade 6 math, but the area underneath the line is the amount of emissions, right? So the sooner we do it, the less emissions we have. And the more chance we have, the less risk we're taking, right? So obviously we could do other things. Like we could, for example, just keep going where we're going to 2030 and then drop off a cliff. So it really becomes, the issue really becomes how feasible are some of these things to do. So where do Ontario's emissions come from? So this is a 10-year-old chart. Unfortunately, I can't find recent data, but it gives you an idea of where we are spending our emissions in Ontario. So buildings are about 17%, but most electricity is used in buildings. So if you go to electricity, we have probably another 6% there. It's about a quarter of our total emissions in Ontario. It will change from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And so what do we know from this? Well, what we know is that there's no silver bullet. It's not going to be like one set of one sector will be able to solve the problem and everyone else can just keep going on as they are. And it's going to be relatively hard because we look at all of these different things. We can see that transportation and road emissions, we probably have 25% right there. So that's the shape of our problem. If we go to Toronto, because these jurisdictions are like Like Toronto can pass laws within Toronto, right? Ontario can pass laws. Canada can pass laws. So Toronto's problem is really not about industry and not about agriculture. Surprise, surprise. It's about buildings and it's about transportation. And quite interestingly, at last December's council meeting, just 2 months ago, they passed two interesting things. One was they asked staff to start looking at what it would take to ban gas appliances, meaning furnaces, hot water tanks, stoves, in Toronto. And the other thing they did is they asked Toronto Hydro to look at what it would take to electrify. So there's what Toronto is doing right now. The other thing that's interesting when we're solving this problem for buildings is obsolescence matters, right? There are no cars on the road today, which will be on the road in 2050. The cars last something like 15 years. And okay, so on Saturdays in antique car shows, they will be there, but they will not be being used as transportation, right? And so that means the solution for things like cars could be new cars, and I personally don't think it's going to be cars, it's going to be electric bikes, it's going to be some smaller forms of transportation, of point-to-point transportation, as well as much better transit. But essentially, we can solve this problem with new vehicles. With buildings, not so much. Like that is a picture of Toronto. That represents our wealth, our collective wealth. And we're not knocking it down and rebuilding, much as some of my fellow architects would love to rebuild Toronto. We're not knocking it down. It represents our wealth. We have to figure out how to adapt existing buildings to the new paradigm. So another thought I'd like to give you is that we have to set our goal and then work backwards. And so if our goal is getting off gas, is reducing emissions, we have to think about what it takes to reduce those emissions, what are the elements, and come backwards. Because it's quite possible that we could, just by slowly getting better, we could be going up a hill that does not lead to the target. We need to start with our target and work back. And I'm being slightly cheeky, what would Jesus do? The Roger Martin of the Rotman School of Business has this little saying is what would have to be true, which essentially says, pick your goal, figure out what would have to be true, figure out how to get it into place. So replacing natural gas, our emissions from buildings is all about natural gas. That is the thing. So we have to replace it. So there are a bunch of options to replace it. There's a bunch of hydrogen-ish options. There's a bunch of electrical options. And then there's renewable natural gas. So what does this look like? So I belong to an organization. I volunteer at an organization called the Toronto 2030 District. And we are a bunch of total nerds, like complete nerds. And we're architects and engineers and building owners, building managers. And we want to know the costs. We want to know how to do this. We want to know the equipment. We want to know when it can be delivered. So we did this study, and this is the answer. After a whole bunch of work, this is the answer. The answer is, in reference, natural gas costs us about an average of $1 per square foot, okay? And it's cheapest. Of course it's cheapest. If it wasn't the cheapest, we would be doing something else right now. So the most expensive is actually green hydrogen. And the next least expensive is blue hydrogen. What is blue hydrogen? Blue hydrogen is natural gas, where they split the natural gas and they put the carbon underground and they put the hydrogen in a pipe and deliver it to you, and you burn it much like gas. That's blue hydrogen. Green hydrogen is when they take water and split it into oxygen and hydrogen. It's way more expensive. It's the most expensive, but it's the other way of making hydrogen. And I'm slightly simplifying it, but let's not go into pink and orange and what all these other things. Renewable natural gas would be the next, but it's kind of interesting because we can only make about 15% of what we currently use. So, we can't do that alone, and it would be competing. Electricity with the various different electric resistance or air source, ground source, and this is the cost of the equipment plus the cost of buying the electricity plus the utility bills. So they are the more expensive. So let's look at this from an individual's point of view. So let's say you live in a pre-2004 apartment with a gas boiler. It would cost $2.55 a year per square foot to switch over. So let's say you had a 750 square foot 2-bedroom apartment in there. That would be about $93 a month. So that's $93 a month at current prices, because right now it's hard to get air source heat pumps. It's hard to get some of this equipment. We can't like hydrogen and RNG are not even available. So if we had a market, if the government said, okay, guys, no more natural gas, NRC, the National Research Council, says, we think that if there was a clear market, heat pumps would come down by 30%. So this is an example where as individuals, like you could switch over, and there are a lot of people who have the means to do so and are doing so sort of as a proof. And I thank them very much. But the rest of us aren't exactly going to be able to do that. So we need to act collectively so that we can start to bring these prices down. So the other thing is, what about feasibility? So blue hydrogen, that was the next cheapest, right? Let's go with that. Well, blue hydrogen, unfortunately, in my humble opinion, is a unicorn. It doesn't exist. We have put hundreds of millions of dollars. The idea with blue hydrogen is you split it, you put the hydrogen in the pipe, and you put the carbon underground. We have put hundreds of millions of dollars into carbon capture and storage, and they do not have a working plant right now. We'd have to get the CCS plants. Hydrogen, the hydrogen molecule, fun fact, is smaller than the methane molecule. So we'd have to rebuild all the distribution pipelines. And we don't have any problems building pipelines across Canada, right? So there you go. And then the local system, some of the local system can take the smaller molecule, but not all of it. So somewhere between 1/2 and 2/3 of Toronto roads would have to be dug up in order to put in new pipes, in order to put the hydrogen in the pipes. The main advantage of this one, and the other thing is there's no safety standards. Like me as an architect and my engineering buddies, we follow standards. Like there are standards that keep electricity safe and the gasoline in your car safe. You're riding around on a tank of explosive stuff if you're in a car, right? But we've perfected this so that it doesn't blow up. We have none of that for hydrogen. We have to develop it. We have to get the monitors. We have to get all of that. Not done. And we would have to, once we've done all that, then we would have to convert about 1 million people a year in Ontario in order to hit that amount. So that's an issue. The next cheapest was the RNG plus heat pumps, also a unicorn. We don't have RNG plants. We don't have enough bio. It's made with biomaterial. We don't have enough biomaterial. And we don't have, even if we did, and we used it all for buildings, which is unlikely because airplanes are going to want it, we would have to match it with electricity. So, okay, possible, and we could start, the other thing people say is, oh, well, we'll start using natural gas and then we'll convert over because renewable natural gas is the same stuff. Like we've got all the standards, but that kind of leaves us open to just keeping using that natural gas. So the other thing which is a lot of governments are following, is let's do energy efficiency. But remember that 60% mark that we're supposed to hit? So building energy efficiency can only get to 60%. That would mean in the next 8 years, we would have to do deep energy retrofits on all of the buildings that are currently using gas. And a deep energy retrofit is like taking off the outside wall of your building. Like you have to move out. This is not a minor thing. It is very difficult. I would say it's impossible. You may debate that, but I would say it's impossible. But the reason why politicians like it and like pushing it is because it kicks the can down the road. We don't have to make the decision to get off natural gas and figure out what we're doing. We can just kick that decision down to the next government. So suddenly the most expensive thing looks like the only viable thing. In order, we could start converting right away, which means we can go at a slower pace. We already have a plan for expanding our electrical system. We could ramp that up. And so we would be able to essentially, if the boiler in a building or the furnace in a building dies, and they naturally die for some reason, and I think sometimes it's planned, but residential house furnaces seem to die every 8 years. Instead of putting in a gas furnace, you put in a heat pump. Doing that alone would get us there. So you don't have to take out your windows, you don't have to take out your walls, change your furnace. Yes, your electricity bills are going to go up. But if you do that, then efficiency starts to be economical. So this is the most viable from a feasibility point of view. Okay, so let's take a look at the other thing that's going to kill us, which is embodied carbon. So in a building, mostly it's materials that create embodied carbon. Embodied carbon is the idea, how much carbon did it take to make this thing, right? So here's all of the ways that all of the carbon that goes into making a building. So there's constructing it, there's extracting the materials, transporting the materials, manufacturing the materials, transporting them to site, using large trucks to make the buildings. Then there's the operating, and then you have to demolish it and haul it away. So this is how we measure embodied carbon. So when we look at it from a materials point of view, timber, for example, has about 1/10 of the embodied carbon of, say, cement. So why don't we just go with that? Problem solved, right? We'll build all the buildings out of wood. And if you follow the news, you'll see that proud announcements are being made by companies and universities and other people saying, we've got an all wood building. And that is not a bad thing. Like all of this experimentation is a good thing. We learn something, but we do have to figure out what the total cost is, because this, right? If we use all wood, we are starting to further put pressure on our forests, which are the lungs of our planet. So you don't have to read all the little bits and pieces, but this is essentially somebody who was calculating what kind of a reduction we would get if we used all of the new technologies to make low carbon concrete, okay? And then they compared it to reusing a building. So that little blip at the bottom, that is reusing a building. And the other two are the amount of embodied carbon that goes into completely new buildings. Like I've done several projects, hospitals into residential, for example, where we take a building that's no longer needed for what it was and turn it into something else that is needed. Schools are also great for retrofitting. But what are we really doing? This is what we're really doing, because it's easier to finance, it's less risky. We know all of the bad things, we don't know all the bad things about existing buildings and how we're going to deal with them. So mostly this is what happens instead. So I'd like to take a quote from one of my second favorite Christians, who would be Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, who says, one of the most important things that we are lacking now is a vision of a better future that we can head towards, as opposed to an apocalyptic future we can avoid. And so I take heart because I think we can do this. I think we have the technology. I think it's expensive, but not too expensive. And we definitely have to help low income earners. But we can't do it without individual action. We can only do it with government action. And so therein lies the problem. The federal Liberals are behind hydrogen. Premier Ford is expanding our gas system and has said he will not prepare the electrical system for heating. City of Toronto, as I said, is moving towards an electrified future. So we have a bunch of people doing different things, but we're not quite there yet. And I really truly think that we have to pay attention to our politics, and we have to, because this is the path forward. This is the way that we can do it. And so, of course, what am I doing? Well, I took a look at the different parties, and I think that the Green Party has the best approach. And so I've decided to run. Yay. I can't imagine it. Very many of you live in Don Valley West, but if you do, vote for me. But I think that whoever you vote for, really take a look at their plans. And I hope through this presentation, you've got some things to look for, like look for how much land they're proposing to set aside. Look for how they're proposing to decarbonize. Are they proposing to electrify? Are they proposing to go to hydrogen? I think what I'm hoping to give you is some of the signposts for how you can evaluate different parties' platforms. Another thing you should look for is everyone puts out, a number. They say, oh, we're going to be 40% below this or 60% below that. But they keep moving the starting line so that it's easier to get a higher percentage reduction number. I mean, really look at when they expect to be zero emissions and how they expect to get there through what path. So my final question to you is, will human beings ever meet the extraterrestrials? You tell me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sheena Sharp. It's been certainly a very enlightening presentation. If you are a fan of facts, figures, and evidence, you can see this is facts, figures, and evidence. That in it may not be the whole picture, but it's certainly a very deep dive into exactly what's going on here. So I thank you very much, Sheena Sharp. Now, if we could all, as a tradition at HAT, please take yourself off mute and give Sheena a proper old-fashioned round of applause for that presentation.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Now, Sheena, if you'd like to stop sharing for a moment there, and so I can see my people, and we can get some hands up, certainly, and get some questions going. We'll start off at first with questions only. We'll try to keep the comments to a bit of a minimum, but if we have time, we'll sort of switch to more of a comment base and discussion idea. But I want to take full advantage, obviously, of Sheena's presence here today. Maybe she'll come back, but definitely not on this, possibly on this topic when of course he is running for office. But certainly this is the opportunity to ask Sheena some good questions based on her expertise and her presentation today. So we'll go to Rinny first. Rinny, what have you got for Sheena?
Hi, yeah, I'm super interested in the numbers. Being someone that works in the trades and understanding sort of fluid dynamics. I had a little bit of a clarification question on the pipeline scale issue. So going from natural gas to hydrogen, the problem is that the volume and pressure won't match. Like there's not enough volume for it to be efficient or to flow.
That is a second problem. The first problem is leaks, in that the pipelines aren't actually constructed to carry hydrogen, particularly the larger distribution pipelines.
Okay.
And so the second problem, which you rightly bring up, is that hydrogen takes more space, if you will, to put it simply, to create the same amount of heat. And so the way that the system works, as you probably know, is that we actually end up storing the fuel in the pipe somewhat. And so we have to make sure that we can get it to move when it's really cold and everybody's using natural gas. We have to make sure we're putting enough in so that enough comes out the other end. That's what you're talking about, flow, right?
Yep.
So there are some issues with flow. I believe, based on other people who are more expert than I am, that those issues are more solvable than the issue of leaks.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Okay,
I'm gonna
follow-up
look into
question?
this more.
Yes, excellent. Okay, thank you very much, Rainey. Sheena, you might want to just adjust your microphone a little bit for in front, perhaps. We're getting a lot of tip-tap background noise, but
Okay. Okay.
it's a little better. That's certainly. Okay, Catherine, your question.
Okay, first a statement and disclosure. I do live in Down Valley West. I didn't know that you're running, so be careful with your answers. I have power. All right, I want to respond to your opening question and your closing question, which was, will we meet extraterrestrial? Anyway,
Yes.
I've never really understood the belief or assumption that if we meet life from other planets ever, that it's going to be life that bears any resemblance to humans. That's always seemed to me like a theistic kind of approach, thinking that we have an inevitable march toward something that resembles humans, which to me is contrary to what, you know, Darwin's theory of evolution, which we've come as a scientific basis, and instead, my view, we're just a product of a series of, you know, extraordinary events, and I can't imagine would be reproduced ever. So that's kind of my question and comment. How do we know if we meet other life, it would just not be something closer to amoeba or something?
I am being somewhat tongue-in-cheek, obviously, but I do think that, and I don't know for certain, I'm a student, so to speak. You listen to all the scientists who are thinking about this, and some would claim that based on the fact that we believe that the whole universe is made out of the same elements, that there would be some similar paths and some divergent paths. So there is the curious question of, if there are similar paths, why haven't we detected any others who are kind of like us? So I think that is an open question, and you're right. Like I think that it's a beginning kind of field that people are looking at. So there's a lot of different divergent ideas, and it's kind of exciting. But one idea is that civilizations and life kind of kills itself, kind of gets to an apex and collapses. So I think that's that's a little bit stark, especially when you look at what we're doing and whether or not we'll get there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Thanks for the Darwin name check. This is Darwin Day, so you'll get an extra $5 in the post or a reduction on your next membership when you mention the word Darwin. It's our code for today. But certainly this is not not exactly Sheena's area of expertise, but I guess the idea based on what you've said in your opening, Sheena, we just want to extend that 23 minutes a little out as long as
Yes.
we can.
A little bit more.
Yeah, just a little bit more, and that might be get it out to an hour at least. You know, make us feel good. Question from Elka. Good morning, Elka.
Yeah, my question, Sheena, is about living walls. You know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
So I would like to know what you think of living walls, external, internal, and whether the climate you live in has any impact on that.
They're essentially works of art, as I think of them. They're fairly expensive. They do, depending on the plant species, they can clean the air internally. And so you sort of have a series of fans that suck the air through the plants and recycle it. I was working on a building that had human anatomy labs that had a lot of formaldehyde in the air. We took a look at it, and we could build a living wall, or we could put a lot of spider plants, which love formaldehyde. It's like candy to them, and they cost like $2 at your local store. And so I would look at it in that kind of light. There are many solutions to similar problems. They are beautiful. So they almost take the place of a work of art, like a living work of art. And so if you have the money and resources for that, it's a great thing to do. If you don't, there are actually other ways of doing similar things.
Okay, I just want on a totally different thing. I just want
Yeah.
to mention, I live in a condo now,
Yes.
and condo I think was built in the late 1980s. So it's an old building, and we all have heat pumps. Every unit has their own heat pump.
Is it a heat pump or is it a fan coil unit? Because that would be rare to have
It's
a
a
heat
heat pump. They're heat pumps.
pump. Okay.
Heat pumps, air to air. And when I lived in King, I had air to ground. Ground.
Yeah.
To,
Yeah.
yeah. But these, we were also surprised when we moved in. We found this. Every unit has that. And they
Yeah,
have
that's
and
unusual.
they have their own
Yeah.
hot water tank. Yeah.
Yeah. That's very unusual, but that's kind of where we have to go. I'm sorry, I'm making the clicking because I'm nervous. So that's essentially where we have to go. And so partly the question that I would ask you to share with everyone, like, are you uncomfortable? People tell me, well, how can we heat with heat pumps? Like, what if the power goes out? But they don't really realize that your furnace doesn't work without electricity. Your gas furnace needs electricity to work. So have you had any problems with your heat pump? What's it like living?
No problems. It's wonderful. But also, I'm in a condo, and I'm in the middle of a condo.
Yes.
So my heat hasn't gone on maybe more than once or twice during the winter because it's just warm. And some, if you've seen me here, I can't wear. I'll come in wearing as little as I can wear and still show my picture because it's so hot. Yeah. So
some of that. So that's an interesting point when you
it's
say
the
that,
structure of the building, right?
It's the structure of the building, and the higher you go, the hotter it gets, and that has to do with the way that we have. Like, I started my career in '87, so I started with some of those older systems, and it has to do with preventing air from moving about the building, because the people at the top are like doing hot yoga in the nude, and the people in the bottom are wearing snowsuits, right? So it's not, there's an issue here, right? And so there's a design issue. So that is part of the problem. But also, as you say, like, if you live in a house, you have 6 sides. You have the ground and you have 4 walls and a roof that you're losing heat. You live in an apartment building, you have one side. It is more efficient. Apartment buildings are inherently more efficient than single family houses.
In my building, it's not so much the level. It's where we're facing. I'm facing south, west, and the north side, they're always freezing.
Yes, that's another problem. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Elka. Just to comment on heat pumps, when I came back from the UK, I installed in homes that I lived in after that tankless boilers, because I felt that they were a good technology that was in use in the UK and never hardly used here. And I installed a heat pump in my home. Each time I thought I was accessing a contractor who was used to those technologies, so that they would be good with dealing with them. And I achieved that in the tankless boiler situation. But with my heat pump, I found that I felt like I was dragging the contractor into something they didn't want to be doing, and they did a very bad job of it. And then I would have years of problems. So I think that there's a real, in the industry, and maybe Rinny could comment on that, just having to drag contractors along into areas that they have little expertise in and maybe not as desire to do that. It's a resistance that you don't expect as a consumer. And I think you have to be very careful to make sure that who you're dealing with is someone that wants to do this and is good at it.
Well, I really like to comment on that. I was talking to Mike Schreiner, who's the leader of the Green Party, and he was telling me, he wanted to green his house and go through that experience. And you know, I have some friends who are engineers and they designed it for them, but at every step of the way, at financing, at installation, it was really hard to find someone. And you found someone, they said, oh, no, don't, that's not how it's done. Like put in a gas furnace, right? And this is partly like this whole dragging thing, that's a lot of work. If the provincial government said, we're going to get off gas, here's our plan for getting the provincial government put in the gas system. It wasn't some kind of organic thing where people said, oh, I'd like to use gas. They actually, in the 40s and 50s and 60s, they put the gas, they're still putting the gas system into Ontario, right? And so the provincial government has to take it out. And if they did that, then the local, like Belly Brothers seems to be everywhere here in Don Valley West and across the city. Like if they saw an economic opportunity, if they saw that putting in gas furnaces was not going to be the future, that putting in heat pumps were, they'd learn how to do it. They'd learn how to sell it. And suddenly they'd have 3 or 4 models instead of 1 model. And so that's what I mean by the power of small business. If instead of dragging people to do something that is more expensive and takes a whole whack of time when they have jobs and other things, like if the provincial government says the equivalent of, okay, everybody out of the pool, we will figure out how to do that. And small business will say, this is an opportunity, I'm moving in, and you will not have that problem anymore.
Wow. That's a revelation to me, certainly, that gas wasn't a market decision, that was a governmental decision. And so the next revolution, the renewable revolution, will not be a market-led system either, and shouldn't be expected to be.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Sheena. Our resident scientist, John Janis, has a question for you. John.
Oh, I'm just interested in, I guess, the building envelope and heat losses through the walls, et cetera, for single-family dwellings. And I was wondering, one of the trends seems to be basically wrapping the house from the outside and then sealing it up. I suppose from an architectural point of view, it looks but ugly, but I was just wondering, is that the cheapest and most efficient way of reducing heat loss through walls? The other one I was interested in is, what's the current thinking on heat losses through large windows? Because another trend seems to be having these enormous walls of glass. And well, that's fine, except when you have to replace them, I suppose. But I was just wondering whether the R values are getting better or worse or staying the same, because it seems like a huge area to try to keep your losses down on.
So very interesting question. So to start with, on the envelope, we always ask our clients, so do you want an innie or an outie? And putting it on the outside does not have to look ugly, just saying. But I did it to my house, for example. What the advantages there are, if you're kind of happy with the way the house is, it's very minimal disruption, right? You can apply in Toronto. There are bylaws that say you can go into the setback if you're putting insulation on. So 6 inches. So you can essentially, I put insulation on my entire house and went down to the footing. I did not insulate under the basement. That's another big chunk of money. But so it's really about, if you bought a house, for example, and you wanted to renovate it because you needed major changes, then it would make more sense potentially to do it from the inside. But the other thing you have to pay attention to, it's a little bit tricky, is that brick. Many of our existing Toronto houses have double wide brick, and there's no insulation. Like it's got wood lathe, horsehair plaster, double wide brick outside. Like that's it. And if you actually insulate inside, that brick has never been frozen in its entire 100 years of existence, because the heat from inside has kept it warm throughout every winter. And so you'll start to get freeze thaw. So you have to be careful. That's another thing you have to be careful of when you're making the decision of whether or not to insulate inside or outside. So the second part is windows. Windows have not gotten extraordinarily more efficient. And when you think of windows, like the crappiest wall, like a wood concrete block wall with 2 inches of insulation stuck on it is probably around R6, R7. And the best window with triple panes and gas from the planet Xenon and double low E and all that kind of stuff is the same. It's probably around 6 or 7. And actually the glass is better than the frame. The frame is the weakest part. So a bigger window, because it has less frame per area, as far as the window is concerned, is a slightly better R value. But I wouldn't make a glass house because obviously the solid walls are much better. Like mostly if you're doing a really efficient house, you're looking for R40 in the walls or 60 in the roof, something like that. From a physics point of view, each addition of insulation has diminishing returns. So going much more than R40 doesn't make a lot of sense economically or otherwise. But if you, that's where you kind of want to head for in the walls, and the sort of the starting point is kind of 60% wall, 40% window. If you stick within those parameters, you'll get a balanced. I'm sorry, I'm way too nerding out, guys. I'm so sorry. But those are kind of the guidelines that you might think about approaching it. And some ideas, I spent about $110,000 insulating the outside of my semi-detached Toronto home. And I had problems. I was trying to finance it, and my banker said, yeah, but Sheena, are you doing the kitchen? Are you doing anything that will add value, right? The kitchen, for example, like, shoot. So, so that is one of the issues, but that sort of gives you a framework for where you might start. And what did I get from doing that? I reduced my my heat loss by about 66%. So I was able to hit this number, but it just cost a lot of money, right? And so we can do it. We'd have to do it to every single building in the next 8 years, but it's possible to do it to get to that first deadline through energy efficiency. It's just pretty expensive. And so what I found in the end, because I took out my gas furnace and hot water tank and put in really efficient appliances slowly. I have a couple left when I get money, but that whole thing, I'm paying about the same in electricity as I was paying before in gas and electricity, but only after I spent this big whack of money doing insulation. And I would suggest that the power of small business could actually change that too. Like, I don't have to sit and talk to my contractor and threaten him with, he's a friend, so it's a light threat, but we're going to do a blower door test. We'll be able to tell where all the leaks are. This is how you tape it together, right? So, those are sort of the parameters and the costs that the results that we got from doing that. Hope that's helpful.
Okay, thank you, John. And certainly the truth you're spouting about Windows is quite amazing, and it's very contrary to all of the window ads you will hear from all of the big window manufacturers of how efficient their windows are. But I guess they're talking about in comparison with like a single pane window, which is basically an open door.
They also like, we actually measure, like manufacturers will give us a U value or an R value. We actually measure it, because they don't take the average, and they don't take the average from Toronto. Some of the numbers are coming from Arizona. I know someone here is from Arizona, where the temperature differential is a little bit different, and whether or not you're getting solar heat gain or losing heat is a little bit different. And the center of glass is always the best place. Some people measure it at center of glass, so they're not lying. They're just not telling you the truth that's useful to you for figuring out how much you're going to lose.
Cool. Okay, we'll go to for first timer Paul Kaplan. Paul, question for you.
Yes, my question is regarding the idea of greening, big cities. So, like, I was in Milan, Italy, a couple of years ago, and there's a building there. I guess that's pretty famous because it's entirely green, literally. it has planting, like every unit has plantings hanging out on the outside, and I guess it also has things on the top. And I know there are also big cities that have been, putting planting up on the roofs of tall buildings. And I guess the idea is to try to, have an environment where there's more, more carbon dioxide capture and conversion and release of oxygen into the environment. Is that idea, does that have merit?
So I think that there's a debate. I am on the side of the debate where I would say no. I know Toronto, for example, has a green roofs bylaw. And so you really have to, if frozen dirt was great insulation, we would be golden in Canada. We would not have any problems, okay? Frozen dirt is not good insulation. And so, and in the summertime, does it reduce air conditioning? Yes, we are right now a heating dominated climate, but yes. But it doesn't necessarily, like the cheapest installations don't do all the things that they give off moisture and all that kind of stuff. Some plants don't do that. And the ones that are easiest to maintain don't do that. So there's a lot of debate in how to do it. In general, plants on buildings are the enemy of buildings in terms of leaks and long-term damage to the structure of the building. My personal feeling is that we should keep plants on the ground and we should not put more buildings in the green belt. We should figure out how to put buildings in the city and put plants where they thrive the best, which is in the green belts and in green spaces within the city, protecting the ravines, doing that kind of thing. Yes, of course, your garden on your balcony is not doing any harm at all in the pots, but looking at, like, look at all the biological, Susan Simard and Finding the Mother Tree, and look at all of those kinds of things that talk about the advantages of plants. It's not planted in little pots on buildings. Like, plants are a system, and we need to save those systems. And so I think it's a little bit of marketing. That's the side I fall on. But I fully admit there's a big debate going out there. There's other people who will tell you to.
Okay, thank you. We'll go back to Rini now, our in-house contractor. Rini?
Sorry to apologize. I think Ronnie has been trying to participate. To Ronnie, you're on.
Oh, yes. Okay, we'll get to Ronnie in just a moment. So, Ronnie, is that true? Did you have your hand up, or in some way?
Yeah, yeah, I did want to ask something.
Okay, we'll get to you in just a moment then. Rini, go ahead.
So yeah, my expertise doesn't fall specifically in residential, but I did grow up with a building inspector as a father, so I have some perspective on this. And I just wanted to ask, in terms of the building code, like I know they update it every few years, and I heard a lot about R values as a child. I'm just wondering, like, is there any lobbying being done or bills being passed in the near future? Like, I'm hoping that you might know about this, due to these, like these initiatives trying to get things greener and more efficient. Like, is that something that's on, like on an agenda for the Green Party or anyone else?
I think that yes, but it's also a little bit of a red herring, because the building code really only applies to new buildings and somewhat to really deep energy retrofits. And so most of the buildings that we will have here in 2040 exist right now. And when we change the building code, you don't have to go back and upgrade the building. If we did that every 5 years, like, we'd be ripping apart all of our buildings, right? And so we don't do that. And so the building code, yes, and there have been some really big changes. And also in Toronto, the Toronto Green Building Standard, which operates at the planning level as opposed to the building technology level. And there have been some really big things, like Toronto will give you incentives for building new buildings at essentially, we call it the net zero level, but it pays attention to carbon, which essentially pushes buildings into electrification. The building code is looking finally at saying, no, you can't put gas, you have to electrify. So So, or come up with some other system. Good luck with that. But that is moving. And it's an important thing because the new buildings then don't add to our load, but it's really going to solve a small but important part of the problem. The biggest part of the problem is existing buildings.
Could I ask one more thing, or should I wait for later? I know I've already spoken a couple times.
Go ahead, Rennie.
Okay, so my other question was, like sometimes we're watching, futuristic things on media, like movies and TV shows and things, and generally their conceptualization of buildings is very uniform. So I was wondering if there's any merit to the standardization of shapes and sizes of buildings. Like I don't have a background in physics as far as like efficiency and heating and things, but with your knowledge, I'm curious if that is anything to look at as opposed to aesthetics. Like
certainly in our lifetime, buildings have become far more standardized. One of my partners who started practicing in 1961, architects were actually designing how to build windows on site at that point. So right now we've already come to a lot of standardization. I don't think buildings are also cultural, right? And you take pride in your home, in the building that you live in, what it looks like. So I think that, and is there a real benefit? No, there is a benefit to getting housing to a certain level. Is there a benefit to prefab housing? Yes, you definitely can get, you can't get cheaper right now, but you can definitely get higher quality walls through panelization of walls, for example. But you can still sort of have the owner's expression, like what do you want your building to look like? I don't think that making all new buildings look exactly the same actually has very much benefit, and it doesn't, like different occupancies need different things, right? So when we did one of the City of Toronto's new net zero buildings, it's a childcare at Mount Dennis at the end of the Metrolink subway line at the west end. And we didn't start out by saying, oh, it has to be shaped this way for minimum energy loss. We started out by saying, what does this building need to support kids, right? Because it's not a childcare unless we do that first. And then we say, how do we make it energy efficient? And it's quite easy to do. So that's the way I think we should be doing it. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Sheena. We'll go now from Rennie to Ronnie, and then Sharon and Bruce will follow. Ronnie.
Wow. Okay, thanks, Sheena, for that very enlightening talk. It's a bit overwhelming, although I'm familiar with a lot of the ideas, but I recommend, there's so much to read to be able to be educated on this. But what I worry about is what you said the government has to take.
Oh no, we've lost Ronnie.
We'll give her just a moment there.
Okay.
You pop back here. Okay. Okay, maybe we'll give Ronnie just a moment there to reset herself.
The next.
Ronnie?
Yes.
You dropped out there for a bit, so you'll have to repeat your latter comments for the last 15 seconds or so.
Oh my goodness. Okay. I don't even see that. Yeah. So if we can't, or can we agree, or would there be too much, in order for the government to come up with something, how would it be decided? Like what if they choose the wrong thing or not? And then follow up to that is, the government, the federal government has billions of dollars put aside for fighter jets, billions, which they could put into cities to renovate, to do all this, and I'm just worried that we're going to be, we're putting the money in the wrong places. So those are big questions. Do you understand my first one?
I think they're really big questions, and I think we as citizens have to get our heads around them so that we can push people. So, for example, The Eglinton Crosstown is costing about $12 billion. So in the last election, Trudeau said that he would put 120 billion into infrastructure. Well, Toronto could eat that all by itself, right? The rest of the country would kind of be a little bit upset, but Toronto could do that. So the money, as you're sort of pointing out, there's money going to other things. The money to us, when they say there's $40 billion in a renovation fund, that sounds like a lot. I can't remember, I worked the number out. It's something like $500 a person with a building. Like, it's not going to do it. And I think that the other thing is that maybe subsidy is not going to do it. Like, we really have to create an atmosphere where we start to bring the prices down and we start to focus our technology. And the other thing you essentially said was, what if they pick Betamax and everyone goes to UHS, right? What if, and the government has done that before. People who say the government shouldn't pick winners, the government picked natural gas. So the government should be looking at this. And if I was in charge of the world, which may not be a good thing, but if I was in charge of the world, I would spend the next 2 years saying, give us your proposals. Like, Enbridge, you want to switch over? Show us that this grand plan you have for blue hydrogen actually works. And then show us you're willing to put your company on the line so we take it over if you don't perform. Like, we start being really pointed and going to ISO. And ISO is currently, the chair of the board is Joe Oliver. I don't know if you remember that name. People say, oh, he was Stephen Harper's finance minister. Well, he's actually the guy in charge of our electrical system right now. So, and he says, we will never take heating onto the electrical system. We as a people have to say, come up with a plan. And then in 2 years, we should pick and start implementing. That's what we need to do. Like, we need to do it smartly, but we need to start challenging these people. And instead, we're kind of saying, okay, we'll sign this deal with Alberta to make blue hydrogen, but they don't really have a plan. And they're just getting money to do research. They don't actually have to come up with anything. I mean, we have to be smarter as citizens and as governments to tie people down. And maybe I'm saying this because I know, as a small person who interacts with government, I am held to a whole pile of milestones that these big guys don't seem to be held to. Like, what's going on here? Where's the performance? Where's the KPIs? Like, where's the performance measures here, guys? So I think we could do it if we were smarter.
Okay, thank you, Ronnie. Sheena, your mic was cutting out a little bit there, so just
I'm sorry. Okay.
You got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sharon Lee next.
Yes, I'm the one from Arizona. We only have heat pumps in my area.
Yes.
I only have electric. The area I'm in is next to a mountain and they didn't want to run gas lines. And that's just fine with me. I don't have to worry about explosions. And my house is heavily insulated because I'm in the heat.
Yes.
And
yes.
I have solar panels. Anybody that's got 350 days a year of sunshine ought to have solar panels. And I'm very fortunate. I've even got the heavy pane windows because I live next to a freeway, and mine was done that way because of the noise.
Yes, yes.
I would assume it helps with the heat too, you know.
Yes.
But anyway, so that's just to keep you up on what's going on out here. And I really am enjoying your talk. Thank you so much. I really like it.
And thank you for paying for the helping us pay for the picture of the planet and allowing Canadians to have it. But I think what you say is actually kind of really important. Like, air conditioners are heat pumps.
Yeah.
And you live in a cooling dominated environment. Well, Ontario is a heating dominated environment. And I think we should just be careful, like, be local, understand what your environment needs, because we hear these things from all different places. And it's like, a fellow stood up at a public meeting and said, all we have to do is paint our roofs white and everything changes. Well, that does really help. It tends to help in heating dominated climates, right? It will not save the planet, but it does help in heating dominated climates. And so we really have to, like, start to learn the basics. And everything you say, I'm just smiling, like, yes, in your environment, that's exactly the right thing to do. So
Thank you, Sheena. Bruce, welcome. I'm glad you're here today. You have a question for Sheena.
Yeah, I'll keep it to a question. I have more to say on it. Maybe I'll get a chance to talk about it later, but I'll keep it to a question right now. And that is, you didn't talk at all about, you started talking a bit about tree canopy in Toronto. And I'd like to pursue that, or in Canada. I suppose it's more broader, or Ontario, a broader conversation. But specifically in Toronto, the impact of tree canopy and how we get to a broader tree canopy. Any ideas there, or is that kind of beyond your expertise?
Okay, well, what I was talking about is slightly different, which is the ecology of a forest, right? So trees, and that we can't get within, and we have great, actually, forests in the ravines, but in the built up area, tree canopy is different. As you say, it's more about shade, and it is really useful. And if you plant deciduous trees, for example, so that the sunshine comes through in the winter time, which you get a little bit of heat from, but in the summertime, you get shade, so you really reduce air conditioning, and you can significantly reduce air conditioning if you have shade from trees beside a building. It tends to only work in really low-rise buildings, obviously, but yeah, careful planting, and it's something that a lot of people don't pay attention to. And it's also kind of like a long-term fix, because if you plant a tree today, it's the person who owns your building in 25 years that's going to really get the benefit, right? So it's a little bit of a long-term thing. And I do think we should be thinking long-term, and we should be thinking about how trees and our existing trees, how they shade. They also, the other thing about trees is that they don't live forever. And so having a plan that outlives us, that says, okay, here's my tree, and it's probably gonna die in about 20 years. So I'm gonna plant another one kind of beside it, or in a similarly advantageous location. And so that when my first tree dies, my second tree will be there. But human beings don't tend to have like a plan that will benefit the people who come after them, unfortunately.
Absolutely. Thank you. And we'll look forward to more comments in a moment. We're going to be opening up to a little more general comment-based discussion in a moment there, Bruce. So I look forward to hearing those. I would say actually within our culture about tree canopy, that even in places where you would expect tree canopy would be something that people would take advantage of, our culture actually says, keep the trees at a distance from the house because they just cause problems. The roots go into the basement, the branches fall on the house, they scatter what in the country we used to call tree garbage everywhere. And it's just a nonstop hassle. And when people found out that I had 100 trees on my property, some of them almost overhanging the house, my country relatives were just horrified. They thought this was the worst possible idea.
Yes.
You're going to pay for it. And I kind of did in the ice storm we had about 10 years ago. But I still love the fact that the trees, as you say, provided all that lovely shade in the summer. We've got a question from Sylvia now.
I'm Don Valley West member. Then, if you would be elected tomorrow or June, what would be the two main things that you'd be part of your action plan?
Oh, the hardest thing is keeping it to two. The Green Party itself, and I support this absolutely, is focused on climate change, affordable housing affordability, and mental health services as being the most urgent things that we need to resolve. If I was put in charge of buildings, for example, I would do essentially what I said, start developing plans for converting Ontario off natural gas. And at the same time, look at, I think that the whole issue of how we're going to pay for it is really important. And I think that we have to be a little bit careful about like, oh, we'll subsidize energy, and that kind of subsidizes everyone. And I think we have to really look at how we spend our money, how we get the most value out of our money while we're, and making sure that people who can't afford it don't freeze in the dark, essentially. So I would start with that. I would first look at the goal. How do we get there? And then secondly, look at at economic justice and figure out how to make adjustments so that we're all going to get through this.
Okay, thank you, Sylvia. We will open it up for more comment-based questions and comments now, a bit more discussion, if that's okay with you. And certainly we'll start with John Janis. John.
Oh, I guess I was just going to ask about where the electrical power will come from, in your opinion. You know, obviously the Ontario nuclear plants are aging, and that's half our supply. And Quebec is really pushing for major industrial users rather than export to Canada. They also like to export to the States. I just noticed they signed a deal with, I think, Algonquin Power to buy their power because they anticipate so many domestic needs from large industrial users. So I'm just wondering what sources of power will be available if you get off natural gas.
So this is a really important question. One thing that I'd like to give you, electricity is fundamentally different than natural gas. It's not a commodity that you use, it's a capacity. So it's more like if you have a school bus that carries 20 kids, you can carry 10, 11, 12, fine. You get to 21, you've got a problem, you need another school bus. So it's kind of, it's also the same as your furnace. You size your furnace for the coldest day of the year. So most of the time it's not operating at peak. You don't size it for the average. So we really have to look at peak electricity. And one of the things we have to look at is how these building decisions, like one of the advantages of cold climate heat pumps, which are the most expensive, is that it puts a much smaller load on the electrical system. So the question starts to be, what's more expensive? Like is it, I know people from the electrical system who say, is it worth it to us to subsidize cold climate heat pumps? Because then we don't have to build another plant. So those kinds of things are part of the plan that we need to take going forward. There are definitely, we can't use things. Sorry, I shouldn't say we can't. There is a very lively debate about how we can use renewables like solar and wind, how we get backup power, batteries, whether or not, if we keep a steady base load, do we make green hydrogen at night? Because if you have a very small residual cost for electricity, it becomes, worthwhile to do that. Do we do true geothermal? And you'll note, I always say ground source exchange because it's like, that's up to like 200 meters down. If you're going 2 kilometers down, you can actually create, and this is very much, I think there's one plant that Saskatchewan is building that will do that. It's different in different parts of the world. This is essentially how Iceland operates, right? So, so there's a bunch of different possibilities that are all in the initial stages. I don't think we can get rid of nuclear immediately. There's a long-term plan, because what are we doing with all these deadly canisters of waste stored in water right now? So I think that it's about double that we probably need. We have already planned for a certain expansion, and I think the technologies are there. And if the will was there from our electricity operator, that there's already pilot projects that put some of this stuff in place. If the will was there, then they could start to participate in all of those things I mentioned, like true geothermal, true wind, solar, and battery. Hydro has its own problems because you tend to create CO2 from flooding landscapes, but all of those options are available, and I think the elements for putting a plan together are in existence already.
Okay, thank you. Sheena, we've experienced a little increase in distortion on your mic there. If you just take a moment if you can adjust it, or anything you can do to do that, might be helpful. We've got now a comment, as promised, from Bruce. Hello, Bruce. Oh, Bruce, you're still on mute.
Sorry. Okay, here we go. My
I
apologies.
hear you.
First of all, I wanted to thank you folks for hosting this event. I appreciate it. I'm actually an old member of the Center for Inquiry, which I assume the people from the Humanist Association of Toronto would be familiar with. And I've always described, or for the last number of years, I've described myself as a secular humanist. So I have to pursue this a little bit further down the road. Thank you. I also, the other intersection here I have is I'm thrilled to hear Sheena speak. I am the CFO or CEO for the Spadina Fort York Green Party Association. So I wanted to hear what Sheena had to say, and I'm thrilled at the brilliant conversation she put together. We're very lucky to have also Diane Sachs, who was the former Environment Commissioner before Doug Ford came in and canned her, running in University of Rosedale. So we have some true champions on that side here. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to say my little speech. The issue I wanted to bring up with is the psychological side of it. I just don't see people putting connecting the dots on things. I'll give you a prime example. Ontario Place and an exhibition place on the lake shore of Toronto represents 350 acres, again, right on the lake shore. Ontario Place is now being reimagined by Doug Ford with a new legacy idea that has three elements on it, three major elements, which is a Live Nation, it's a place for concerts, a thing called Echo Reco, a company called Echo Reco, which are doing aerial adventures, zip lines, that kind of a thing. But the major one that is just really disturbing is a thing called a company called Therma Group, which are putting a 667,000 10-story high glass structure on Ontario Place, complete with pine trees for spas, saunas, and a water park that is going to have to be heated and cooled in this incredible, windy area of Toronto. Meanwhile, Toronto has a plan through Transform TO to, by 2050, have 40% tree canopy in the city of Toronto. It's now at 25%. And there's a ton of headwinds along with arboreal enemies that are attacking the trees. And of course, people cutting down trees even right now to build housing in their backyards for laneway housing, which is again, a whole other issue. However, again, the connecting of the dots. So you have the city of Toronto wants to create this tree canopy. We have this beautiful island of Ontario Place, which could be the western hub of an incredible reimagining of the waterfront for the western beaches, which have been completely eroded over the last few years, going over to Humber Bay. And the Green Party actually has policy in place to turn Ontario Place into a provincial park. Meanwhile, Doug Ford and his cronies are putting it together to create some vision of something that 40 years down the road is just going to look ludicrous. I don't know what the climate is going to be like in 40 years, but I know Doug Ford doesn't know either. And putting those kind of structures at Ontario Place is just mind-blowing to me. So it's that connecting the dots issue that I've just not seen from municipal governments, from federal government, from the Ontario government. We're talking big issues, big pieces, like changing the entire natural gas structure that we've been talking about today. But it's really just connecting the dots psychologically. What should be at Ontario Place? I think it should be trees. I think it should be a provincial park. I think it should be a place where people can go and congregate and use it as their cottage. In 2040, how hot is the climate going to be in Ontario? If we have 4 million people living here, where are they going to go? The island is already getting a lot of business. People aren't going to go all the way from the west end to the east end to go to the eastern beaches. The western beaches need to be redone, and it should be this whole building up right now of infrastructure of open space, treed areas that people can utilize, and we just don't have that in our brain. And I'm just absolutely blown away by that. And I like to throw that at anybody in this forum as to how we change that, how we get that psychology of connecting the dots put together.
Thank you, Bruce.
Is this,
Any
do you
thoughts,
want me to comment or?
Please, Sheena, yeah, any thoughts on that? And certainly anyone who wants to put up their hand and talk about that issue or any others, this is the discussion part of the afternoon. Sheena.
I think you're right. I mean, that's what I try to do. I think that's what we all have to try to do. Particularly like the idea that politicians should somehow just sort of listen. I think that's a bit of a cop-out. I'm not saying you shouldn't listen, but should also bring something to the table and try to have a discussion about where you could go between options. I also think one of the things you talked about reminded me of Transform TO's. They did a weather projection for 2040, right? And it's like 3 times the extreme heat days we're going to have that in like 20 years. And so looking at how we get tree canopy, how we get shading, how we get access to the lake. I mean, I think those are all really great ideas. And really what's happening, I've seen, obviously the architectural community is kind of all over the spa idea. And that most of those, that chain, it's a chain. It's like putting a Harvey's, the Harvey's of spas on the waterfront, right? And mostly their operations exist in suburban. Like when you look at some of their other operations, it's surrounded by parking, right? And exactly how it is probably the biggest part for me there is cultural, and it is like a jewel. It's a prominent cultural place in Toronto, and perhaps we shouldn't be putting the Harveys of Spas in one of the most prominent cultural places that we have.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Sheena. Yeah, I look at what other cities have done who are on the lakeside, places like even somewhere like Cleveland, where you don't think, oh, Cleveland, that's the jewel in the United States crown of architecture. What they've done on the lakeshore is
Yes.
infinitely superior to what Toronto has done by building this fence of condos that we have, this network of expressways, this strip of beaches and land that's like, sometimes feels like you're trying to enjoy yourself on a median in between 2 highways, and it's just not the best. Chicago is a fantastic example of what you can do with a lakeshore, and certainly, as said, Toronto has squandered a lot of that, and it seems like Ontario Place is the last vestige of what we really could do. This last opportunity for us to turn this around, or at least to be the first chance to turn it around. And it's there has been a consultation process, and maybe it's disappointing to me or inevitable that it has turned out the way it has. But I don't think it's too late either. We'll go to Catherine next. Catherine.
Okay, so I'm speaking from a lot of ignorance, but I was thinking about John's comment about where electricity comes from. So of course I Googled it, and this is from the U.S. government. It says that most of the nation's electricity was generated by natural gas, coal, and nuclear energy. That the headline didn't have the breakdown, but my question is, there's such a push when people talk about green. I'm not talking about houses, but cars, like moving to electric cars. And so my question is, how green is it to move to electric cars if most of the electricity is being produced by natural gas and coal, for example?
I love this question. So first off, there's a jurisdiction problem, and I believe in giving everyone the due that they deserve. The Liberals shut down the coal plants in Ontario, and that was our biggest drop in emissions. In fact, that one thing has carried Canada through some of its targets, right? It's a big chunk of that. Right now, Ontario uses about 5% natural gas. But the other concept is we can't say, oh, well, we'll wait until the electricity system is perfectly clean before we put buildings on electricity. We have to walk and chew gum at the same time. We have to say we're cleaning the electricity system and we're cleaning our buildings to meet that. And so right now, we have to pay attention, like particularly in our own political realm, you have to know what's being used in our political realm. And that is hydro. I think we're 25% nuclear. Another big chunk is hydro, mostly hydro, I think. I'm not exact, I can't remember the chart off the top of my head, but look up Ontario. And Ontario is about to get worse because we're going to take the nuclear offline and refurbish them, and we're going to use natural gas to replace it. So we're about to go down to something like 30% dirty power before we come back up to like 95%. And we have to have a plan for slowly converting. We have the opportunities, and we have in Ontario made some of the big moves. And so you'll see all these detractors saying, oh, the price of electricity, it's all because of solar panels or something like that. It's not. And we did some of the things that we need to do. We've already knuckled under and done that. And we should be proud of ourselves, as opposed to beating up politicians who are saying, no, we should like have more natural gas. No, we're on the path. We're partway there. Stay the course, keep going. And with cars are really interesting. That's another thing. I'm sorry, it's like pushing a button. Cars make me mad because most people, now I know they're really expensive. Okay, I get that. But, and I can't afford to own one. I'm thinking of electric bike, but anyway, the cars, most people charge their cars at night. And so if you buy an electric car, one of my friends who bought a Tesla because it was like a status symbol, and then he discovered on the Tesla site, it showed how you could actually save money owning a Tesla. And he was like, it's a status symbol, not an economic, like whatever, not a money savings thing. You can go about 350 kilometers on $10 in a Tesla, okay? You cannot do that in gas. And you can charge it at night while you're sleeping. Guess when we have excess electricity? At night. And Premier Ford just offered, he was going to make super low electricity to make electric cars more affordable. They're actually, it's a little bit disingenuous because they're actually already really affordable. So he's going to make them more affordable. Maybe he could take that money and do something else with it. But we have, okay, so one more number and then I'll be quiet. So we have about 8.5 million cars in Ontario. That's about 17 terawatt hours that we would need to charge those cars. We currently use about 134 terawatt hours in Ontario. So we're talking about putting those 17, remember I talked about, sizing the electricity for the peak load. It's not the peak load at night. We can easily just slip those electric cars like very easily into our off-peak load without even noticing it, all clean electricity. Like it's very possible. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox now.
The only reason you're here, Sheena, is to stand on that soapbox. So please don't. You can get off the soapbox in about 15 minutes or so. We'll go to Elka again. Hello, Elka.
Hi. First, we were talking about planning before and the problem of governmental planning. And I just want to point out that Indigenous people in Canada plan for 7 generations. When a plan is put in place, it looks forward 7 generations, what will we have there? And that's why things work a lot better than, anyway. But my question is using abandoned, in your opinion, is using abandoned mines for agriculture an economic way to produce food?
I don't know anything about this.
Okay.
So I have no idea. It's, yeah. I think that I know that I sat on, Kathleen Wynne put me on her climate panel to advise Glenn Murray. And there were other people on that panel, the head of the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, really interesting guy. I know that most of the stuff they're looking at to save GHGs in agriculture and to expand agriculture does not have to do with putting it in mines. It has to do with no-till farming and a whole bunch of practices that they want to institute and propagate. So that's about all I can offer you, that the farmers are actually looking in other places. Maybe they're wrong, but that's what they're doing.
Okay, thank you. Back to John Janis.
Okay, as an ex-hydro person, I'd like to offer a clarification about getting rid of the coal plants. It's nice that the Liberals took credit for that, but those shutdowns were planned in advance before the Liberals got involved. Remember, especially for Lakeview.
Thank you.
We a year before that, or 2 or 3 years before that went down, we were struggling to keep that thing running, not from the point of view of coal, but to keep a couple of bad transformers there from exploding. So that was like imminent, years before the Liberals took credit for it. Nanticoke was also on the block. It was just a question of when, and that was kind of an economic decision. So yeah, I mean, hydro was well on its way to getting out of coal.
I'm willing to give credit to the Conservatives too. And I'm rather fond of the Ontario line, just saying.
Oh, the Conservatives though screwed up in shutting down the Pickering station because they didn't realize that when you shut down the whole station, you have to requalify the whole station, whereas the standard hydro route is you shut down a unit at a time, which they did at the time. Unit 4 was the first unit to be shut down. But when the Conservatives got in there and pushed everything, things were done in such a rust way that Unit 4 could never come back. So they basically turned it into a non-functioning plant. So I don't really have any love for the way the Conservatives dealt with the nuclear program. But anyway, those were just some kind of biased comments.
Okay, thank you very much, John. Facts are always nice. I like them. Bruce, we've got come back to you now.
Yeah, I'm going to display my naivete here. It sounds like we have some people on the forum here who have some knowledge of the hydro systems. So we spent, I'm trying to figure out the grid. So there was a huge discussion for many years about running pipelines, and we have run many pipelines from the west to the east. So we wanted to bring all this, it was suggested that we should bring all this oil across from Alberta and use that for Ontario energy. The flip side of that, though, is why can't we build out the grid better coming from east to Toronto, to Ontario, to the west? We spent $5 billion donated, subsidized, lent, whatever it was, to the province of Newfoundland to keep Muskrat Falls going. Quebec Hydro is like 5 cents a kilowatt hour or some stupid thing. It's very, very cheap. Why aren't we redoing the grid and orienting it towards the east and bringing all that power into, eastern or central Canada from the east, from these huge, construction project or these huge plants that they built in the east in Quebec and again Muskrat Falls. Anyway, I'm repeating myself. I'll leave it at that.
I think there's something that I could ask, and I think John could probably give some really good insight on this, but I was recently at a conference because I'm trying to understand it. So I'm very much sort of feeling around in the dark here. But there was a proposal that Canada Grid is an organization that is actually looking at some of these issues and trying to build political support around some of these issues. And one of the things you should point out is just because Quebec Hydro makes it for 5 cents doesn't mean they're going to sell it to us for 5 cents, right? They did it for a reason. Their taxpayers paid for it. They want to get something back to do other things. But one of the things that was pointed out is that if we connect, the sort of Eastern Seaboard is already connected, but we could, if we start taking heating on, we could build in diversity, which is when it's really cold in one area, it's not as cold in another area. So you can start to load level in that way. And they're already looking at some of those ideas in Europe. These ideas are slightly above my pay grade, but I am saying that Canada Grid, go there, take a look at it. There are some people doing this, and mainly, as I understand it, because I was on a phone call and the governor of Maine, I think, was on it. And they're, they've passed several resolutions in the States that won't allow this to happen, right? And so there are some political problems. And I was on a presentation with Gretchen Bakke, and really cool person. She wrote a book called The Grid. If you're interested, read that book. But part of what she said was some of the stumbling blocks are actually pride and jurisdiction. And like part of Ontario could actually be better served from Manitoba, right? Because it's way closer to Manitoba than Southern Ontario. And it's not. And that has to do with trying to keep what you've got and being proud of doing things and don't let other people have part of what we're doing. So I think some of those issues are political. And if you want to explore that more, I would recommend those two things. And perhaps John has some ideas too.
We'll let John decide on that. John, if you have any input, you can put up your hand and after we speak with Paul. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to get back to the infrastructure needed for, for everyone to have an electric car? Because you mentioned, you'd say, you would charge it at night. Now that means that everybody has access to a charger that they can connect to overnight. So in a private home, you'd have to build, I guess you build one in the garage. If you live in a multi-unit dwelling with parking, then you'd have to install one at each parking spot. And there are people, of course, who live in a downtown area like Toronto, who don't have designated parking. They have to park at a parking lot, that takes overnight parking, or park on the street, on streets where you're allowed to park overnight. So all those places would have to have charging stations as well. And then, of course, when you're traveling and you're not coming home every night, if you're say you're driving from Toronto to Vancouver, then you need to have charging stations along the way. Now, I was just looking up what the plan in the US that the US is doing on this. It says the Bush from Thursday, the Bush was it from Friday? The Bush administration. I'm sorry, the Biden. Why do I keep saying? Okay, the Biden administration on Thursday unveiled its plan toward nearly $5 billion over 5 years to build thousands of electric vehicle charging stations. Congress approved the funding to states as part of a $1 trillion infrastructure bill in November. Do we have anything like that? Is the federal Parliament of Canada considering any legislation like that to build thousands of charging stations?
Well, you realize that Premier Ford took out charging stations that were already installed when he came into power, right? The past government, the Liberal government, had plans for actually building EV research centers and funding an EV research center that would pull people here. And when Premier Ford axed that, some of the big car manufacturers shut down plants, right? It's a pretty serious thing. In terms of EV charging, I think that most, except for the Conservatives, most parties have a plan for adding EV charging. And I would like to add something you might be interested in. Like when we're doing a new condo, it's 5-story wood frame in Oshawa, and we are putting, because we expect, you can't, like the building code says, like put 20% or something. Well, that's not going to work. Like we went from horse and buggy to cars in 5 years, because what happens is that gas stations, if a significant number of people go to electric, gas stations start to shut down, right? Like who's got range anxiety now? So the whole system had to sort of come in lockstep. What we're doing in the condo in Oshawa is we're providing a rough-in at every parking spot, and we're providing a system whereby, in order to keep the prices down, because you want to, because we have to put in this huge electrical connection, right? If we can make it smaller, that's better. And so but you don't need 8 hours to charge a car, especially if you're only going somewhere like 20 kilometers away. You need like an hour. So what we're doing is putting in a system that starts to level the load. So you buy an hour every night. And if you go farther that night, you can buy an extra. It's kind of like your cell phone. Like you buy a base rate and then you pay more if you go over. So it starts to level the load within the building. So what we have to do, it's partly in the building code, but from a building's point of view, what we have to do is make sure every new building can provide that to all spots. The problem with putting it in existing buildings is that the electrical connection is not necessarily big enough. So you have to be able to level the load across. Like there are people working on these things. There are some, I guess the overview I want to give you is there are people working on these things. There are exciting things. The infrastructure, the most important infrastructure is not for the 1-2 weeks a year where you travel to Manitoba to see your mom. It's for the day-to-day infrastructure that we have to put in, and people are working on it. And I think you should look for that in political plans when you're voting. Like what are people's plans to build out the charging station. And just remember that Premier Ford actually took them out. Now he's kind of saying, oh, I support electric cars. That's nice. But it's taken you 4 years to get there.
Okay, but my question really is about, I guess the merits of the plan in the U.S. to put all these charging stations in along these,
I think it's a small part of what we need to do. You will be buying an electric car that does not require you to charge, or an electric vehicle, bicycle, whatever, that does not require you to charge every 100 kilometers. You're going to buy one that fits your needs, your commuting needs. That it's important for long-term travel, but I think the real infrastructure we need is actually the day-to-day infrastructure.
Okay, thank you, Sheena. We're just about to wind up the discussion this afternoon. So we're going to close out the speaker list certainly very soon. If you have a burning comment you need to make, then certainly put up your hand now. But we'll probably end it off with Eben, who's a newcomer, a first timer to the discussion, and to John Janis. So first we'll go to John, because you may have a comment based on previous discussion. Go ahead, John.
Okay, quick thing on grids. I think Sheila's right. It's very political. I think the utilities are pretty pragmatic about this. Whatever the technical requirements are, they'll strive to fulfill them. And if that means, wheeling power from other jurisdictions, they'd be more than happy to do that. But there is a lot of politics. Like Ontario did want to buy the output of one of the parts of James Bay 2 from Quebec, and Quebec refused. I guess when you look at a lot of the generating capacity of Ontario, there's a political decision about how independent does Ontario want to be with its generating system. Does it want to generate all its power, or does it want to be beholden to other jurisdictions? On the other hand, the power companies has always wheeled power through various jurisdictions, through the interconnects with Manitoba, with the US, with Quebec. So there is some capability there, but you do have to worry about line losses. And you have to worry about, if you're cut off, you'll have to worry about, balanced loads, this sort of thing, as the peak moves across the country, that kind of thing. But technically, it doesn't seem like there's a problem, but there is obviously a political issue plus cost issue, especially now that you're getting more utilities being private rather than public.
Okay, thank you, John. Okay, we'll go to last comments. Welcome to the meeting, Eben.
Hi.
How are you doing today?
I'm great. A friend just forwarded this to me, and I logged in, and I had an immediate question because I was so interested in what I think what Sheila was talking about in regards to the Oshawa condo, Sheena. And I just wanted to, so I used to be the president of a board, so I'm actually really closely involved with this. It's one of my little passion projects. And I was wondering if you're going to be making the building with the build-in in the parking spot for the electrical conduit in each spot. And you had mentioned that you'd want to balance the load in that situation. But my question is more from a utilities perspective. Would that be in a plan, let's say, would that be an additional cost on top of what the regular maintenance fee was, if you wanted to do that in a building that was already existing and put those in? From a civic standpoint, should there kind of be rules around that so that buildings, if they want to take that option, kind of understand what the plan would be to file that in? Does the city have a place in that discussion to make sure that's standardized across the way so that maintenance fees in these condos don't go up through the roof if they weren't planned originally for that?
I think that it doesn't. I think that the condo board regulations are truly complex.
Yeah.
And create animosity that they shouldn't create.
Yes.
But essentially there are companies out there that will provide this service, and you should go to one of those companies. And you buy your power separately from the power that you buy in your unit. And you go to one of those companies and get them to look at your connection.
I see.
Yeah. And get them to, and they will put it, it's like a computer, it's like a computer controlled system. So get them to put it in and they will make money off it, and they may give part of it to the condo, and they amortize the initial cost. You have to see if you can do it anyway, because what is your connection, right? And when will you be using it, and how do you balance it? So that's what I would do. There's 2 or 3 of them out there. I would go out there and find one and get them to come in and check out and give you a proposal.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Evan. Nice to have you here. And for last comments, we'll go to Sylvia. Hi, Sylvia.
Just in relation to the last comment, my building has placed 2 charging stations. We have it for at least a year already. And the cost doesn't reflect in my expenses because I'm not using it. The charge goes directly to the owners, so the residents who are charging their cars. Then it's not a reflection in our expenses, but it's a good initiative. Thank you.
Fantastic. No, I could see all kinds of opportunities for that, to have a system where essentially you plug in the car and it takes the power when the power is available to be taken, and it's through an app, and all those good things just happen. Computer control is an amazing thing, certainly, and I think the some of the problem we have with new power systems, new ideas of any sort, is just getting our head around the fact that this other system we've been dealing with for almost 100 years of all of these types. We've worked out so many of these problems, and they're functioning at a level that we understand, even though we're just lay people. But it's only because of the fact that we've put all of that effort in over 100 years. And all of the problems that we're looking about now, like how is this possibly going to work? All of these renewable powers, the electricity, and how's it all going to work? It will. You give us a few years, and these problems will be insurmountable problems. Will not be insurmountable at all once the weight of technology and the incentive to do so becomes clear. And so I think that what Sheena is talking about here is producing some of those incentives that actually do come from ourselves as a political will, giving those to governments that then make those things, that will, known to businesses, corporations, and everybody that's working within the system. So just my 2 cents there. Well, thank you very much, everybody. We've had a very lively discussion, a very interesting comments here. I thank you for being here, certainly, to this wonderful event. And I, again, thanks to Sheena Sharp for being here, presenting her very interesting and educated views, and so humanistic, that the thoughts of exactly what we're doing as humans, as a culture, as our society, but based so heavily in rationality and in evidence, in what is possible and what can be done. So again, fantastic Darwin Day lecture. I thank you now. Please open up your mics again. Let's give one last round of applause to our own Sheena Sharp.
Thank you.
Good luck, Sheila. Good luck.
Good
luck, Sheena.
Thank you. Thank you.
Go for it. Well, again, thank you so much for being here today. We've had a really good discussion. We've got a couple minutes over, but I hope you will indulge us in that. If you want more information about our group.
Now, if you don't mind, I may
Okay.
I'm in a meeting. Oh, sure. Just a minute. Hello. Hi. Sorry.
Okay.
I missed your intro, Richard, because I was having an argument with Virgin Mobile. Could you please say it again? I'll carry on.
Oh, no problem. Thank you very much, Karen. So I just wanted to thank you for being here today. The Humanist Association of Toronto, humanisttoronto.ca, is available for all your humanist needs. We're going to be back here on Monday night for a wonderful meeting of Beyond Believing, where we'll be entertaining our own in-house author, Wei Jiao, on the Eastern path to humanism that she has written about. And we'll be back here on Wednesday for a hat chat, a little social informal, and of course back here on Saturday for a discussion led by Karen Lynn, the aforementioned Karen Lynn, on freedom. Big talk about freedom right now. What does it mean to us, and how does it mean for our society? So please come back for all of our events, and we'll look forward to seeing you back here again one other time. So take care, everybody.